Step away from that vehicle right now. We got reports of shoplifting and you match the description.
What description, officer? I have receipts for everything in these bags.
I don't need your attitude.
Show me ID.
On the afternoon of September 17th, 2025, in the parking lot of Dillard's at the Texas County Mall, Sheriff Officer Peter Donald made what would become the worst mistake of his 18-year career in law enforcement. What began as racial profiling of a black mother shopping for her son's prom suit would end with a $9.3 million settlement, a criminal conviction, the termination of multiple officers, and reforms that would ripple through the entire sheriff's department. Because the woman Officer Donald decided to harass that afternoon wasn't just any mother trying to do something special for her grieving son. She was someone with the authority, the security clearance, and the determination to make sure this never happened to anyone else again. This is the story of how one sheriff's racism collided with unyielding justice and shattered. Before we continue, quick question. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city and state in the comments because I love seeing where our community is tuning in from across the country. And if this story resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Grace Benjamin was not supposed to be shopping that Tuesday afternoon. As a 41-year-old special agent with the United States Secret Service assigned to the Vice Presidential Protection Detail, her schedule was meticulously planned months in advance. But life, as it often does, had thrown her a curveball that required flexibility. Grace had served in the Secret Service for 9 years. And before that, she'd completed 12 years in the United States Army, including 2 deployments to Iraq, where she'd earned a Purple Heart for injuries sustained during a convoy ambush outside Fallujah. She graduated with honors from Prairie View A and M University with a degree in criminal justice, trained at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, and had received commendations from 2 presidential administrations for her work protecting the families of the nation's highest-ranking officials. Her personnel file was spotless. Her record was exemplary, and she protected vice presidents, their families, foreign dignitaries, and coordinated security for events involving tens of thousands of people. She'd been trusted with literally the highest level of security clearance the United States government could grant. But on September 17th, 2025, she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about her son Daniel. Daniel was 16 years old and about to attend his junior prom on September 23rd, just 6 days away. And it should have been one of the most exciting times of his young life. But Daniel's father, Grace's husband of 18 years, Michael, had died in a hit-and-run accident 6 months earlier on March 9th, 2025. Michael had always been the one who handled the big moments, coaching Little League, teaching Daniel to drive, planning college tours. And he'd been excited about prom, talking with Daniel about suit styles and colors and the importance of looking sharp. They'd looked at options together online, marked their favorites, and talked about tailoring and shoes and the navy blue that Michael himself had worn to his own prom decades before. After Michael died, Daniel told Grace he didn't want to go to prom because it hurt too much without his dad. But Grace had found Michael's notes, including printouts of suits, a list of stores to visit, and a circled notation next to a deep navy option at Dillard's. So Grace had made a decision. She would honor Michael's memory by finishing what he'd started. The automatic doors of Dillard's exhaled cool air as Grace stepped into the September heat, shopping bags weighing down both arms. Inside the largest bag, wrapped in tissue paper and secured with receipt tape, was the navy blue suit. The fabric had the exact shade Michael had circled deep enough to photograph well, traditional enough to honor the old rituals. Grace had spent 40 minutes with the sales associate, checking the measurements twice, ensuring the fit would work for Daniel's lean frame. The prom was 6 days away. There would be time for alterations if needed. The parking lot stretched before her, shimmering in the afternoon sun. Cars angled into rows, their windshields throwing light. Grace navigated between a lifted pickup truck and a minivan, with stick-figure family decals, her modest Toyota Camry waiting 3 rows ahead. She'd parked under a light post out of habit visibility, exit routes, sight lines. Training never left you, even on a Tuesday errand run. The patrol vehicle appeared without warning. It pulled across the lane in front of her, blocking the path to her car. The engine idled. Through the windshield, Grace saw the driver, a white male, late 40s, the build of someone who'd stopped maintaining fitness years ago. His eyes tracked her movement. Then he opened the door and stepped out, hand already hovering near the holster on his right hip. Sheriff Officer Peter Donald. The name would come later, from the badge she'd photograph. For now, he was just another officer, and she was just another black woman in a parking lot, and the familiar calculus began running through her mind. hands visible, movements slow, voice calm. 12 years in the Army and 9 in the Secret Service, and none of it mattered when someone decided what they saw before they saw who. The officer moved toward her, his stance wide, his jaw set. Grace stopped walking. The bags hung from her forearms. Receipts peeked out from the top of one Dillard's logo clear, purchase timestamp visible. His voice came sharp. Step away from the vehicle. His hand hadn't left the proximity of his weapon. Grace stood 15 feet from her Camry. She wasn't near the vehicle. The command made no sense unless the goal wasn't sense. She kept her voice level. Is there a problem, officer? His eyes narrowed. Suspicious behavior. We got a call about a shoplifter matching your description. You need to show me ID and let me search those bags. No call had come. Grace knew this the way she knew the weight of a sidearm or the cadence of a threat assessment briefing. The lie was in his posture, the fabrication in the way his gaze skipped over the visible receipts. She'd seen this before, not as a federal agent, but as a black woman existing in spaces where her presence required justification. The training kicked in, muscle memory older than her federal service. Her shoulders stayed loose, her hands stayed visible. I'd like to know the reason for the stop. I have receipts for everything in these bags. Donald stepped closer. The space between them contracted, his tone sharpened, aggression bleeding into syllables. I don't need to explain myself to you. Put the bags down. Show me ID, now. Around them, the parking lot continued its usual function. Car doors slammed, engine started. But a shift was occurring at the edges, a woman pausing beside her sedan, phone already rising. A man slowing his cart return, eyes tracking the scene. Overhead, mounted on the light post Grace had deliberately parked beneath, a CCTV camera recorded silently. Grace set the bags down slowly, one at a time. The suit bag she kept slightly apart from the others, a small act of protection for the fabric inside. She reached for her wallet with deliberate movements, narrating each motion the way she'd been taught 2 decades ago by a father who'd survived worse. I'm getting my ID from my wallet. It's in my purse. Donald watched her hands. Show me everything in the bags, too. No probable cause, no articulable suspicion, just a demand backed by a badge and the unspoken threat of what happened to people who said no. Grace felt the old familiar weight, the exhaustion of having to be twice as calm, twice as compliant, twice as perfect just to walk away intact. Her military service flashed through her mind unbidden. Fallujah, 2007. The convoy ambush that had earned her the Purple Heart. Shrapnel in her shoulder, blood soaking through her uniform, and still she'd maintained her sector, returned fire, protected her unit. The vice presidential detail 3 years of flawless evaluations, threat assessments that had prevented incidents before they developed, trust earned through precision and vigilance. None of it visible, none of it mattering. The crowd was growing, phones out now, recording from multiple angles. Grace registered each witness position, each camera angle, the way she'd been trained to map a security perimeter. Evidence. Documentation. The machinery of accountability, if she survived to use it. Donald's voice rose. You getting the ID or not? Because I can make this a lot harder for you. Grace's hand emerged from her purse with her federal credentials, not the driver's license he'd demanded. The black leather case that held her Secret Service identification, her badge, the physical proof of clearances that exceeded most state law enforcement chains of command. She didn't open it yet. Behind Donald, a second patrol vehicle pulled into the lot, then a third. Deputies Thompson and Ellis, their names would also come later, emerging with the practiced casual alertness of officers assessing a scene in progress. They took in the shopping bags, the receipts, the phones recording, the woman standing calm with credentials in hand, and a sheriff's officer invading her space without apparent cause. Thompson approached first. What's the situation? Donald didn't turn. Shoplifting suspect. Matched the description. Ellis was already scanning the dispatch notes on his phone. What call? There's nothing in the system. The lie was unraveling in real time. Grace said nothing. Let them work. Let the contradiction build. Her silence was tactical, her stillness a form of testimony. Thompson's eyes found the Dillard's bags, the visible receipts. Sir, she's got purchase documentation right there. Donald's jaw tightened. I know what I saw. But he didn't. He'd seen what he'd expected to see, what bias had prepared him to find. And now, with witnesses and cameras and fellow officers questioning his narrative, the foundation was crumbling. Ellis spoke quietly. Peter, there's no call, no description, no complaint from the store. Grace finally spoke, her voice carrying the weight of 12 years in combat zones and 9 years protecting the nation's leadership. Officer, I'm going to need your badge number and your names. She nodded to Thompson and Ellis. All of you. Donald's face flushed. You threatening me? Documenting. There's a difference. Thompson stepped between them, a physical barrier. Ma'am, you're free to go. We apologize for the confusion. Confusion. The word hung in the air, sanitized and insufficient. But Grace took it. She photographed badge numbers with her phone, Donald's first, then the others for completeness. She collected her bags, the suit secure in its wrapping. As she walked to her Camry, Donald's voice followed her, low and bitter. We'll be watching you. She didn't respond. She unlocked her car, placed the bags in the back seat with care, and drove away at exactly the speed limit, checking her mirrors for a tail that might or might not come. At home, Daniel was in his room, headphones on, homework spread across his desk. Grace found him there an hour later, the suit bag draped over her arm. She knocked on the doorframe. He looked up, pulled the headphones down. She held out the bag. Your dad would have wanted you to have this. Daniel took it slowly, unzipped the covering. The navy blue caught the bedroom light. His fingers touched the fabric, and something shifted in his expression. Grief and gratitude tangled together. He didn't ask about her day. She didn't offer the details. Some moments needed protection from the weight of the world outside. Later, after Daniel had gone to bed, Grace sat at her kitchen table with a notebook, her phone, and the receipts from Dillard's. She wrote everything. Timestamps, badge numbers, on. The exact words Donald had used, the names of the deputies who'd intervened, the positions of the cameras, the faces in the crowd with phones raised. 12 years in the Army had taught her that battles were won with preparation. 9 years in the Secret Service had taught her that protection required documentation. And 16 years as a black woman navigating a country that questioned her presence had taught her that justice required evidence so thorough that denial became impossible. She wrote until her hand cramped. Then she wrote more. Morning came with the weight of decision. Grace sat in her home office before dawn. The documentation from the previous night spread across her desk in organized rows. Receipts, photographs, timeline, witness descriptions, the machinery of accountability waiting to be set in motion. At 0630, she placed the call to her Secret Service supervisor, Special Agent in Charge, Patricia Vaughn. The conversation lasted 17 minutes. Grace delivered the facts without embellishment, the stop, the fabrications, the lack of probable cause, the deputy's intervention, Donald's parting threat. Vaughn's response came swift and unequivocal, full backing. An internal review would be initiated. Legal counsel would be made available. The service protected its own, and an assault on one of their agents, even off-duty, was an assault on the institution. The wheels began turning in multiple directions simultaneously. 15 miles away, in the sheriff's office at Texas County headquarters, Peter Donald sat at his desk and typed his incident report. The document bore little resemblance to reality. According to his version, he'd responded to reports of suspicious activity in the Dillard's parking lot. The subject, race and gender noted, name conspicuously absent, had been evasive when questioned, refused to provide identification promptly, and displayed behavior consistent with potential theft. Upon further investigation, the matter was resolved without arrest. No mention of the shopping bags, no reference to Thompson and Ellis, no acknowledgement of the witnesses or the cameras that had recorded every moment. He filed the report at 0800 hours and marked it closed. But documentation runs in multiple directions, and truth has a way of surfacing through contradictions. Deputies Thompson and Ellis arrived for their shift at 0900. They filed their own reports separately, without coordination, and the similarity of their accounts gave them weight. Both noted the lack of any dispatch call. Both described the visible shopping receipts and Dillard's bags. Both documented Donald's inability to articulate reasonable suspicion. Both recorded the intervention that had ended the encounter. Their reports landed in the system 2 hours after Donald's, creating a paper trail that couldn't be reconciled. Internal Affairs took notice. Discrepancies between officer accounts triggered automatic review protocols. The case file, barely 4 hours old, was already flagged. While bureaucracy processed itself through official channels, social media moved at the speed of outrage. The woman with the phone, the one who'd paused beside her sedan in the parking lot, had uploaded her video at 9:47 the previous night. 32 seconds of footage, Donald blocking Grace's path, his hand near his weapon. Grace's calm responses, the visible shopping bags. The caption was simple. This is what racial profiling looks like in 2025. Texas County Sheriff harassing a black woman for shopping. By morning, the video had 73,000 views. By noon, it had crossed 2 million. Other witnesses emerged, their footage taken from different angles. The CCTV recording, obtained through a public records request filed by a local activist with experience in these matters, appeared online by evening. High definition, no ambiguity. The complete encounter from approach to departure, Donald's aggression captured in pixels that couldn't be disputed. The story went viral, with the specific velocity that accompanies clear injustice recorded in real time. News outlets picked it up. Civil rights organizations shared it. By the time Grace finished her shift at the vice presidential residence that evening, her phone held 47 missed calls from reporters whose numbers she didn't recognize. She ignored them all. For now, the press conference came together in 36 hours. Grace's attorney, a civil rights specialist named David Kirkwood, who'd built his reputation dismantling qualified immunity defenses, coordinated with Vaughn's office and several advocacy groups. The location, the steps of the Texas County Courthouse. The time, 1000 hours on September 19th. The attendees, local and national media, already primed by the viral videos and hungry for the next development. Grace arrived in her full Secret Service uniform. The decision had been deliberate, discussed with Vaughn, and approved through channels. Let them see exactly who Donald had targeted. Let the uniform carry the weight that her civilian clothes in a parking lot had failed to convey. Daniel stood beside her, wearing the navy blue suit. Also deliberate, also meaningful. The cameras captured everything as Grace approached the microphone bank. She didn't read from notes. The facts were simple enough to require no script. She stated her name, her rank, her service history. Army first, the deployments, the Purple Heart, then the Secret Service, the clearances, the years protecting the nation's leadership. She described September 17th in procedural language, each fact delivered with the precision of someone accustomed to briefing situations where lives depended on accuracy. The stop, the fabricated accusations, the lack of cause, the threats, the intervention, the documentation. Then she pivoted to the personal. Michael's death, Daniel's grief, the prom suit as an act of memory and love, the shopping trip that should have been routine, the violation of being treated as criminal for existing while black in a parking lot. The revelation of her identity rippled through the assembled media like voltage. Reporters leaned forward, cameras tightened their focus. This wasn't just another profiling case. This was a decorated federal agent. Someone whose job involved literally taking bullets for the vice president, being harassed by a county sheriff who'd fabricated cause and threatened arrest. The story exploded across every major outlet within the hour. And in his living room, watching the press conference on the local news, Peter Donald felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The investigations launched with the weight of multiple jurisdictions. The Texas Rangers opened a probe into Donald's conduct. Their involvement requested by the county's district attorney once the scope of the incident became clear. The FBI Civil Rights Division initiated a parallel federal investigation, their interest triggered by Grace's status as a federal officer and the potential violation of her constitutional protections. What they found went deeper than a single parking lot encounter. Donald's personnel file revealed 31 complaints filed over his 18-year career. 27 of those complaints came from black residents. The accusations formed a pattern: unwarranted stops, aggressive questioning, fabricated suspicions, searches without cause. All of them had been internally reviewed. None had resulted in discipline beyond verbal counseling. The paper trail painted a picture of systemic indifference, a department that accepted complaints and filed them away without consequence. But the investigators kept digging, and what emerged in the third week of September was the detail that transformed the case from misconduct to something darker. The hit and run that had killed Michael Benjamin on March 9, 2025, had been investigated by the Sheriff's Department. The lead investigator on that case had been Peter Donald. The file showed a cursory investigation, witness statements taken but not followed up, security footage from nearby businesses requested but never collected, physical evidence from the scene processed minimally. The conclusion, filed 2 weeks after Michael's death: accidental death, driver unknown, case suspended pending new leads. But the forensic analysis, buried in supplementary reports that Donald had never forwarded to the family, told a different story. Paint transfer on Michael's clothing suggested intentional contact. The impact angle indicated a vehicle that had swerved toward him, not away. Witness descriptions mentioned a truck that had accelerated after the collision, not stopped. Evidence of foul play, ignored. A grieving widow left with an accident ruling that never sat right but had no apparent avenue for challenge. And the officer who'd closed that case prematurely was the same officer who, 6 months later, would target that widow in a parking lot. The connection was circumstantial, but damning. Had Donald recognized Grace during the stop? Had the harassment been random or targeted? The investigation couldn't prove intent, but the appearance of corruption, a cover-up linked to a subsequent act of bias, was enough to shatter any remaining credibility. Grace learned of the connection through Kirkwood, who'd been briefed by the Rangers. She sat in her kitchen when he told her, the same table where she'd documented the parking lot encounter, and felt the grief of March resurface with new contamination. Michael's death might not have been the accident she'd been told. And the man who'd closed that investigation without answers had confronted her outside a department store where she'd bought a suit to honor her husband's memory. The cruelty of it was almost mathematical in its precision. Kirkwood filed the federal civil rights lawsuit on October 3rd. The complaint named Peter Donald as primary defendant and the sheriff's department as co-defendant under failure to supervise theories. But the lawsuit didn't stop with Grace. Kirkwood had located 26 of the 31 prior complainants, those whose allegations had been filed and forgotten. They were added as plaintiffs, their stories woven into a single narrative of systemic failure. The damages sought, $9.3 million, allocated across all plaintiffs based on severity and harm. The demands: independent oversight, mandatory training, body camera policies with teeth, regular bias audits, transparency in complaint resolution. The filing made national news within hours. As the investigations deepened, revealing layers of hidden corruption, one couldn't help but wonder, do you believe speaking up against injustice can truly change systems? Share your thoughts by commenting "Justice Now" if you've ever faced similar challenges, or pass this story to a friend who needs to see the power of resilience. Peter Donald was suspended without pay on September 21st, pending the outcome of the investigations. He watched the press conference from his living room, his wife standing in the doorway, arms crossed. The conversation that followed was brief and bitter. She'd told him for years that his anger would catch up with him. She'd warned him after previous complaints that one day he'd target someone who wouldn't let it go. He dismissed her concerns, told her civilians didn't understand police work, told her the complaints were exaggerated, that people played the race card to avoid accountability. Now, watching a Secret Service agent describe his actions to national media, watching his career disintegrate in real time, he had no defense to offer her. She left the room without another word. The distance between them, already strained by years of his bitterness and her growing disillusionment, became unbridgeable. The personal cracks were forming, but the legal machinery had only just begun its work. The criminal charges came in layers, each jurisdiction adding its weight to the accumulating consequences. The state filed first 2 misdemeanor counts of official misconduct and 1 count of filing a false report. The charges carried maximum penalties of 2 years and substantial fines, enough to strip Donald of his certification and pension, even if federal charges never materialized. But federal charges did materialize. On November 8, 2025, a federal grand jury in the Western District of Texas returned an indictment charging Peter Donald with deprivation of rights under color of law, a felony carrying up to 10 years in prison. The indictment detailed the parking lot encounter with precision, citing the lack of probable cause, the fabricated accusations, the threats, and the subsequent false reporting. It also referenced the pattern of prior complaints and the suspicious handling of Michael Benjamin's death investigation, not as separate charges but as evidence of willful intent to violate civil rights. Donald pleaded not guilty at his arraignment. His attorney, a former prosecutor who specialized in defending law enforcement, argued that the encounter had been a misunderstanding, that Donald had acted in good faith based on his training and experience. The defense strategy relied on muddying the waters, suggesting that Grace's behavior had been ambiguous, that split-second decisions in the field couldn't be judged by armchair analysts with unlimited time to review footage. The trial began on January 12, 2026, in federal court. It lasted 8 days. The prosecution built its case with methodical precision. CCTV footage played on courtroom monitors, showing the entire encounter from multiple angles. Thompson and Ellis testified, their accounts calm and credible, describing the lack of any dispatch call and Donald's inability to articulate reasonable suspicion. Digital forensics experts presented metadata proving Donald's incident report had been filed hours after the deputy's truthful accounts, suggesting consciousness of guilt and an attempt to create a cover story. Then came the prior complainants. One by one, 26 people took the stand and described their encounters with Donald. The stories formed a mosaic of bias, unwarranted stops, aggressive searches, fabricated accusations. Each incident, viewed alone, might have been dismissed as isolated error. Together, they revealed a pattern so consistent that randomness became statistically impossible. Grace testified on the sixth day. She wore her uniform again, the same one from the press conference. She recounted the events without emotion, her military bearing evident in posture and diction. She described her service, the deployments, the injuries, the years protecting the nation's leadership. She explained the personal context, Michael's death, Daniel's grief, the prom suit as an act of love and memory. The defense attorney tried to shake her on cross-examination, suggesting she'd been uncooperative, that her federal credentials didn't exempt her from lawful police inquiries. Grace's responses were precise and devastating. She detailed exactly what lawful inquiry required: reasonable suspicion, articulable facts, coherent justification. She noted that Donald had provided none of these. She observed that her cooperation had been complete. She'd stopped when ordered, provided identification when requested, allowed the search of bags containing receipts that proved her purchases legitimate. The attorney pressed, "Isn't it possible Officer Donald made an honest mistake?" Grace's response was measured. Honest mistakes don't require falsified reports. They don't involve threatening someone who's done nothing wrong. And they don't form patterns across 18 years and 31 complaints. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict came back on January 22nd. Guilty on all federal counts. Guilty on the state charges as well, tried simultaneously through a coordination agreement between prosecutors. The judge's comments during sentencing, delivered on February 5, 2026, were unsparing. She noted the betrayal of public trust, the abuse of authority, the targeting of citizens based on race. She referenced the connection to Michael Benjamin's death investigation, calling it a shadow of corruption that may never be fully illuminated but cannot be ignored. She described the pattern of complaints as evidence not of isolated lapses, but of sustained bigotry enabled by institutional indifference. Sentence: 24 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, restitution to Grace and the other plaintiffs, lifetime ban from law enforcement or security work in any jurisdiction, forfeiture of pension and benefits. Donald was remanded immediately. He began serving his sentence at a federal correctional institution in Beaumont, Texas, 6 days later. The personal destruction extended beyond the prison walls. His wife filed for divorce in March, citing irreconcilable differences and emotional abandonment. The proceedings were finalized by summer. His siblings, who defended him initially, distanced themselves as the full scope of the evidence emerged. Financial ruin followed. Legal fees had consumed his savings, the restitution orders exceeded his assets, and the loss of pension eliminated his retirement security. After his release, scheduled for early 2028, employment prospects would be non-existent. Convicted felon, disgraced former law enforcement. A case so public that every Google search would surface the parking lot videos and the trial coverage. The consequences were comprehensive and irreversible. While Donald's personal collapse unfolded, the civil lawsuit reached its resolution. The trial had been scheduled for April 2026, but the criminal conviction eliminated any appetite for further litigation. The Sheriff's Department, facing discovery that would expose decades of neglected complaints and potentially criminal indifference, opted to settle. The agreement, finalized in March 2026, awarded the full $9.3 million to the plaintiffs. Grace's portion, calculated based on her status as the catalyst and the severity of harm, including the connection to her husband's death, amounted to $2.1 million. The remaining funds were distributed among the other 26 plaintiffs according to a formula accounting for duration of harassment, severity of constitutional violations, and documented emotional harm. But the money was only part of the resolution. The settlement included court-mandated structural reforms, binding and enforceable through ongoing judicial oversight, independent civilian oversight panels with subpoena power and authority to recommend discipline, mandatory implicit bias training, not the perfunctory sessions that officers slept through, but intensive programs designed by experts and measured through behavioral assessments, body camera requirements with automatic activation triggers and severe penalties for tampering or deletion, quarterly bias audits analyzing stop patterns, search rates, and complaint demographics. The reforms were implemented starting in April 2026. By the end of the first year, profiling complaints had dropped by 42%. Community trust metrics, measured through independent surveys, showed measurable improvement. Officer conduct, now subject to multiple layers of scrutiny and consequence, shifted toward constitutional compliance, not through enlightenment, but through accountability. The broader impacts rippled outward from Texas County. The sheriff, whose tenure had enabled Donald's pattern of abuse, resigned in May 2026, under pressure from county commissioners and community groups. 3 other officers, whose own complaint histories revealed similar patterns, were terminated through the new oversight process. The case became a reference point in civil rights litigation across Texas, cited in briefs and settlement negotiations as precedent for systemic reform. Legislation followed. Texas lawmakers, responding to public pressure amplified by the case's visibility, passed measures strengthening complaint investigation requirements and limiting qualified immunity defenses. The reforms were imperfect, shaped by political compromise, but they represented movement in a system historically resistant to change. Grace used her settlement strategically. A portion funded Daniel's education, college tuition secured, graduate school if he chose, the future Michael had wanted for their son now guaranteed. Another portion established the Michael Benjamin Foundation, a nonprofit providing legal assistance and advocacy for racial profiling victims. The foundation's work began modestly but grew, helping families navigate complaint processes, connecting them with attorneys, and documenting patterns that individual victims couldn't see from their isolated experiences. Grace continued her Secret Service career, receiving a promotion to Supervisory Special Agent in June 2026. She'd proven herself not just in the field but in the public arena, handling intense scrutiny with the same composure she'd shown in the parking lot. She began speaking at law enforcement conferences, sharing the case not as a victim's testimony, but as a tactical study in what happens when institutions fail their accountability obligations. Her audiences were often skeptical initially, cops listening to someone criticize their profession. But Grace's credibility, built on her own law enforcement and military service, gave her words weight that external critics couldn't match. Daniel attended prom on September 23, 2025, in the navy blue suit. The date had arrived while the investigations were still unfolding, while media attention was still intense, while the family's trauma was still fresh. Grace had asked if he wanted to postpone, to wait for a quieter moment. Daniel had declined. His father had wanted this. The suit meant something. Grief didn't pause for convenience. Grace drove him to the venue, watched him walk in with his date, took the photos that parents take. Later that evening, she posted a single image online, Daniel in the suit, standing tall, the navy blue crisp and perfect. The caption was brief, for Michael, for every parent who can't be there, for every kid who deserves better. The photo was shared 3.1 million times within a week. It became a symbol, not just of Grace's particular struggle, but of resilience in the face of systemic injustice. People who'd never heard of Texas County or Peter Donald shared it with their own stories attached. The image circulated through networks of grief and determination, each share a small act of solidarity. The story closed not with finality but with continuation. The reforms in Texas County remained in effect, subject to ongoing judicial oversight and community monitoring. Profiling complaints stayed lower than pre-settlement levels, though not eliminated bias was cultural, generational, not erased by policy alone. Donald served his sentence, was released in February 2028, and disappeared into obscurity. Grace continued her work, both in the Secret Service and through the Foundation. Daniel graduated high school, attended college, carried his father's memory forward. The themes persisted: hidden strength overcoming entrenched neglect, truth enduring through documentation, justice achieved through method rather than spectacle. Grace's quiet power had dismantled a corrupt system not through rage but through precision, the careful gathering of evidence, the strategic use of platforms, the refusal to accept that injustice was inevitable. The reminder, delivered not as lecture but as demonstrated fact, vocal advocacy, backed by evidence and sustained by community, could foster lasting change, not perfect change. Not immediate transformation, but measurable improvement, institutional accountability, and a foundation for others to build upon. The parking lot encounter on September 17, 2025, had lasted less than 15 minutes. The consequences would extend for decades, rippling through policy and practice, touching lives Grace would never meet, proving that one person's refusal to accept injustice could shift systems designed to resist exactly that refusal. Justice in the end wasn't about vindication or revenge. It was about creating conditions where the next mother shopping for her son's prom suit could do so without fear. Where documentation mattered more than badges. Where accountability wasn't optional. That was the work, and the work continued.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.